If you'd like to participate in the discussion or leave us feedback, you can contact us at levelupyourgamingpodcast@gmail.com or find us on Facebook at facebook.com/levelupyourgaming. If you like the content and want to hear more of the show, subscribing will ensure you don't miss an episode. New episodes come out almost every Wednesday. Also, please review, tell a friend about the podcast, or share with your gaming group. Now sit back and enjoy the episode. Welcome to the Level Up Gaming Podcast. My name is Aaron, and joining me once again, I got Josh. Josh, how you doing today?
Well, love is in the air. I'm having a good time, trying to relax. It's cold as hell outside.
It is very cold outside, but we're hopefully we can spice up this podcast with a little bit of love talk here.
Get a little warm, cozy up by the fire.
That's right.
Get under this blanket with me here, Aaron.
It. If you can tell how awkward this is, you probably think about how awkward role-playing romance in your stories can be.
Yeah. It is a unbelievably complex endeavor that you shouldn't just dive into without thinking about it. I think
this is the quintessential KYP. Because
yes, absolutely. Well, okay, so the thing that brought me to this topic, there's a couple of different things. First of all, I do occasionally watch the Critical Roles, and like in each one of their major campaigns, there is sort of an ongoing romance, which is great. It's fine. It's good. They're between people that know each other and understand that and lean into it. Wonderful. But also last year, my wife may have gotten into reading some spicy novels. And I, being a mature and well-rounded human individual, decided, hey, yeah, books are books. I'd like to read. So I read them after her and was pleasantly surprised in the amount of fantasy stories that are fairly well-written fantasy stories with just a bit of spiciness added to enhance. So there's a lot of this romantasy, is what they're calling it. Romantic fantasy. Vampires, dragon riders, magic users, the whole works.
Yeah.
But with doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again, you look at it's incorporated a lot in different fantasy. If you read any fantasy novels, there's always an element of romance. It's part of a very typical story that you would typically engage with. Is there's going to be some human romance or some attraction, something like that. But in your role-playing game, you've got like Dave, Tom, and Fred all sitting down at your table, and it doesn't matter if one of them's playing a female character, he probably doesn't want to role play out some romance.
Okay? He might. You don't want to be uninclusive here. But yes, role play, like romance, sexuality is a cornerstone of a lot of stories. It is a huge part of our existence in the real world. Leaving it completely out of role-playing games, like unilaterally, seems like it could be a mistake. But it is absolutely something that you gotta know your party. You gotta know your players.
Yeah, I think one of the things that separates it in Critical Role, and again, I haven't seen most of the Critical Role stuff, so correct me if I'm wrong here, but you have a bunch of people who are spouses within the table. And so it's, in a way, a little bit easier to engage in a romantic setting if it's somebody that you know intimately as well.
Funny you should say that. The first campaign, it was Laura Bailey with, oh God, why can't I remember? Not her husband. Second campaign, it was her with her husband.
Mhm.
Travis, and he like definitely didn't want to do it, but she like leaned into it as
Mhm.
his wife, and there was some humor there. But that's also one of those like, hey, if he actually has a problem with it, don't do this sort of thing. And in this season, it's Laura Bailey again, but with Matt Mercer's wife. Um, so like it's mostly just her wanting to do this sort of thing,
Yeah.
and just like moving around.
It's what one of the players at the table really wants to engage with it.
You know what? As long as the rest of the people at the table are okay with that, that's great. And that's one of those things. Like you have to know your players, you have to know your limits, you have to know where it's going to be. Um, these people at the table and people at your table are usually friends. And not to say that you're going to be role playing with enemies, but sometimes if you get into a pickup group or you go to a place, it can be strangers. You don't want to bring up uncomfortable situations or difficult things with people you don't know. You don't bring outside feelings into a game and role play them in your game. That's disaster time, right?
Yeah,
You
this
can
is
bring
not a stand-in for your real life. Okay,
no,
it's so make sure that you take that as like kind of a quintessential rule. It's not there was a Jared knew of a couple that would always play and they would take the merits true love, and they were each other's true love in every game. But
but okay,
that
if
that
they're
that's
both,
that's also very different because again, they're a couple. Like
Mhm.
outside of the game, they are deciding to incorporate that in their role playing within the game as well. So again, it's neither here nor there. It's a extension of who they are as players being transcribed onto the characters they have. But in terms of um again, in terms of being able to engage with another player at your table, in terms of like a romance, they have to be really comfortable wanting to lean into that romance. And then the flip side to that is if you turn it and say, okay, I'm going to engage in a romance with like a character that my GM has presented to us, or like an NPC that my GM has presented to us. So they're two different things. Both things can be very weird for everybody else at the table. It doesn't matter which way it ends up going. And again, this is where you kind of have to be KYP, because if somebody wants to do it, it should really be brought up in session 0 so people are aware of the expectation and sort of understand the direction at which, this is going to be engaged with and all that.
yeah, I think that as in the real world, in a setting such as game, as the game, the story that you're telling, consent is king. You have to make sure that everybody at the table is okay with it. Just because the two people role playing the romance are okay with it doesn't mean that the other people sitting at the table want or enjoy being subjected to that, right?
Yeah.
And if everybody's okay with there being some form of romance there, you still need to have boundaries. What is too much, right? Because if your story gets, really hot and steamy, well, that can start to become uncomfortable for people at the table. Or they can just be into it, just like go for that sort of thing. That is very much something that everybody at the table needs to consent to. And a big part of that, as we'll always say in real life, everybody has the option to say no at any point. At which point, it's your job as the game master, or in some cases, the dungeon master, to fade to black, to stop what's happening, to take it a step back, and you may have to perform some sort of aftercare. You have to make sure your players are okay with what has just happened, especially if something has gone on that takes them out.
Generally speaking, with any sort of situation that will end up making your players uncomfortable or upset, that's there is some after action by the GM to be done. But you're correct in that, if it's something you're not okay with, you have to speak up. I would advise sooner than later. Don't like let everything happen and then get really upset about it. You could let it all happen and then go to your GM and say, "Hey, listen, makes me really uncomfortable. Like, I want to stop." He can put that in action, but say something at some
Yes.
point. Say something, okay? Like, it's really important to do that because, again, at the end of the day, what you're doing here is you're engaging at a table with friends or acquaintances or people you just met, and you know you you're doing it to have fun yourself. So if it's taking the fun away from the game yourself, you're not like disturbing anyone's like real relationship or anything like that. You're just saying that this is like
Yeah.
this is something I don't particularly enjoy.
Okay. So let's just recap. Just I know we're like 5 minutes in here. Recap real quick. Don't bring in your outside BS into a game and
Yep.
try and maintain relationships there. The characters you're playing are not a substitute for your real life relationships. You
Yes.
know, don't try and role play out trying to like get with somebody at the table because you want them to catch feelings. That's gross. Um, Consent is king. Make sure that everybody at the table is okay with what's going on. And that goes for both the GM and the players, that at any point you can say no and back out. And I think the last thing I want to say on like the preliminary, this is the preliminary part, is NPCs are not your game master in the same way that players are not their characters. Don't hit on your GM.
Exactly. Yes.
I mean, do
Again,
hit on your GM,
same
but
thing.
not through the characters.
Again, that is don't act upon your romance throughout like the game as well. So if your GM is the person who's behind the character, don't act on trying to act out your feelings for the GM or in some way towards him vicariously through an NPC. And we had already that applies in the same direction there as well. But yes, everybody at the table has a say in what makes them comfortable. Okay, it's the same thing in terms of like boundaries at the table with anything else. Like if there's like you we don't allow this type of violence in the game. Okay, like it's the same thing, and it could be just one person who doesn't like it or who's not okay with it, and that's enough for it to be. Or it could just be the GM saying like I don't want to tell stories that are like that. Like and the truth is, if GM doesn't want to do it, nobody's doing it. So
Yes,
um,
absolutely.
there are some other generic rules about this, and I spoke about it because I've known plenty of men and plenty of women who've played the opposite sex within a game. Um, do not use like role bound rules within the game to seduce the other person. Even if it's not like you're not going to role play out the romance, just respect the other person enough to not do that to their character and to not subject them to that situation. If you're a GM, basically make it so you can't seduce the other characters.
Yeah. No, that's a consent thing.
Yeah.
If the players don't want it, then it just doesn't happen.
Yep.
And I think this also brings into my next little chunk here. What's the difference between sex and romance?
Yes.
And this is a big part of when we're talking about role playing, we're talking about stories, we're talking about, the opportunities for character growth and stuff like that. There's a big difference between, seducing the barmaid and sleeping with her or, sleeping with the dragon or whatnot, because that is just sex. That is uh, that can provide some story opportunities, but rarely offers character growth. That is uh, a fun activity for whoever is involved if they're into that sort of thing. But romance is all about character development. It's about uh, a relationship growing, forming and growing, whether it's a fast moving relationship or a slow moving one, what obstacles they have to overcome. There is a lot of opportunity in that for story development, for character growth. This is the difference between a short encounter and a long term endeavor. And romance is much more interesting when it comes to role playing than sex, because sex is just sticks.
Generally, the philosophy that we have always uh, ascribed to, because there's not been any romance in the game, but many people throughout the years have seduced an NPC and it has led to sex. There is no graphic detail about it. It's just like you succeeded, fade to black.
Yeah.
Like you imagine what that's like.
But when it comes to romance, it could be a back and forth. It could be a long term thing. It could be an ongoing story beat. Now you've got an NPC that's sort of tied into the character. Or even if it's a romance between players, it can be sort of a back and forth. And there's options as a storyteller to work with that. And you don't have to get into the ooey gooey stuff if you don't want to. And as long as the players at the table are okay with the level of involvement that's happening, then it's an excellent opportunity to throw another tool into your toolbox for being a better game master.
Yeah, again, if people are like accepting or like interested in having a romance play out at the table, or even a romance play out between a character and an NPC, and this is the person cares for the other person. It does all the things that you would do in a typical relationship. You can really craft some interesting stuff because you can create some very torn situations with the romantic partner, meaning that you can put them in danger and invoke better role playing to how you would like thrust yourself into danger without thinking, or do something without thinking about it in such a calculating way, because your romantic partner is trapped or kidnapped or in trouble or however it might be. So there are interesting things that you can do with that. And again, if people are okay, as I had previously stated, you've cleared all the hurdles from the start. This is a really good opportunity to be able to do some very interesting stuff, because you get to play with, you get to bring in one other aspect of very deeply personal human relationships into your game. And again, the more human you can make your game, or the more relatable you can make your game, the more exciting and more engaging the game generally can be.
Yeah. One thing I would like to add, if you're going to be adding romance or letting romance blossom in your tabletop game, is yes, roadblocks are fantastic for a burgeoning couple, for these star-crossed lovers. But don't make it like roadblocks that the players can't overcome. If they want to play this, if they want to have this endeavor, if you are throwing up inescapable hurdles, unsurmountable devastation in their way, it's basically saying, don't go that way. We're not doing that. Just say we're not doing that. Don't like put walls up. Tell them, hey, we're not going to do that if you don't want it to happen. Give them obstacles they can overcome, because that can lead to more interesting stories. It's all about the story, the option, the ability for your players to rise to the occasion. That's the same thing as, like the unwinnable fight, because you don't want them going down a certain path. Just don't do that.
Again, right? Yeah, we've talked about, I think, roadblocks before within a game. And I mean, as long as you set the parameters and the expectations correctly, you shouldn't put yourself into a position where you're stuck in a roadblock situation where, like, hey, I now have nowhere else to go, or I've got to put them in front of an insurmountable objective altogether. I mean, you never want to do that within a game itself. As long as you have appropriate boundaries within the game, then your players will follow those boundaries, and they'll probably press up against them, but your boundaries should be able to hold them back. It would make sense for how you set up your game.
Some fun, like really minor roadblocks. These are great ones to start with before you get into the real big story ones. this we can draw directly from the classics. You can do the star-crossed lovers. You could have like my family doesn't like your family, and these characters shouldn't be together, or like I'm a cleric of blah blah blah, and we're not allowed to have relationships with people outside of our a religious sect. Whatever it happens to be, it can be real simple. Like these are purely social barriers. These are things that like the players' characters have to overcome socially and grow as characters, and that can be interesting. It gives them opportunity to role play, to think about how their character would progress in the situation, and what their character actually believes, what they want to achieve in this world. And those things are excellent opportunities for story.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
All right. So that's throwing romance into a tabletop game with multiple players and such like that. Did you know, Aaron? Did you know
Did I know?
there are a ton, absolute ton? I went and looked of games that are romance style or more for two players. Two players who just want to sit down and have an intimate, comfortable, wonderful romantic session together.
Like sexy dice games, like
Yes, exactly. No, we've actually brought up one of these before. It's a game I really enjoy because of its mechanic. It's called Star-Crossed. Star-Crossed, you play star-crossed lovers, two characters that are inextricably attracted to each other, but are prevented from being together for a variety of reasons. And it is for, one player is one player is the other. You've got a list of activities you need to complete in order to break down these barriers and be together. And in order to do any of the things that you've got to I've got to do a thing, and I've got to role play it out. But in order to succeed or not succeed, you've got a Jenga tower. It's a Jenga game, and
okay.
when the tower falls, based on how well you've done role playing out the attraction between the two of you, breaking down the barriers and whatnot, that determines whether or not you win and the characters are together, or you lose and the characters can never be together.
Oh yeah, I remember talking about this game. We were talking about alternate systems to dice.
Hmm?
So
Yes. Now, there are dice games also. There's a bunch of them. And if you want to play any sort of like romance role playing dice game with a loved one, with that special someone in your life, it's probably better not to be like a one on one, I'm your GM and you're my player. So I've seen a lot of these things they do like they throw you into a scenario and you've got to work through things and you roll dice and it goes on a table and like this is the terrible thing that happens and how are you going to work through it together, and then you can it's dice games with tables. There's one I found called Breaking the Ice. It's like six-sided dice, and the whole thing is about two players going on their first three dates, and you basically just like tell a story about, I do this, oh, I do this, I do this. It's a back and forth, and you roll dice to determine how things go and what sort of events transpire in these first three dates. It's usually not like absolute crazy, but I would really love to see a full on crazy style version of this game. It's designed to be sort of a romantic comedy. First game was pure romance. It's like Star-Crossed Lovers. Second game is very much we're going to throw things in your way and see how you deal with them. Romantic comedy style, very fun. From what I've seen, I can't play it because I can't buy the book, but that's a website problem. We're going to figure that out later. But I've seen this. There's also anthology books. there's a book called You and I, which has 15 two-player games that are separated into 3 sections. There's long distance. I think one of the games is even supposed to be done via writing each other letters and mailing them. Like this is the 1800s. There's like face to face, and then there's touching, which like that's that's great. That's a certain type of game, and wonderful. But I also found the other types of games. Now, we said that there's opportunity for all sorts of story in romance, and there's less opportunity in sexy times. And one of the books that I came across is called Slay With Me. That's S/LAY with me. And this is for all of you ladies who are reading those terrible, terrible books that I had mentioned previously. It's one player plays a monster, and the other one plays the monster's lover, who is the monster's goal is to eat the woman, and the woman's goal is to bed the monster. And I'm reading through this thing, and it is like there's this back and forth, this give and take. And one of the things is that until you reach the end phase of the game, neither one of them can achieve their goals. They're only like picking apart, where the other one is. Which, as far as a game about seducing a monster who wants to eat you goes, that does seem like a really cool way to set things up. But it is, of course, a game about trying to seduce a monster who wants to eat you. So that's a choice.
There you
go. And then I found another like anthology also, which is called Honey and Hot Wax. And I was like, oh, that looks like another. Nope, that's just porn.
Okay, well, there you go.
It's 8 sex positive games for different kinks and orientations. Probably not recommend that to everybody, but like, if your stuff is in there, go for it. Sounds like a fun time.
If it floats your boat. Yeah, again, I think these are all examples of like actual RPG or role-playing games that are available to, role play around romance itself. I think what you can do is you can take from these and see, where the design of how the game is sort of like structured, how you could incorporate that in your game. Because, again, I'm guessing most people who are listening to this podcast probably play D&D or some similar tabletop RPG. And so can you incorporate things from these things to, better heighten your game? And maybe you say no to the sex ones, and I'd probably say no to the sex ones, but the like star-crossed and the breaking the ice, those are things that can create fun and interesting situations for your players. When you are doing round robin through your table in downtime, that I think could create very unique situations.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. If you got downtime in a fantasy game, they've just defeated a bunch of monsters in a cave and they've brought back all this gold and they're sort of healing up in town while they're waiting for blah, blah, blah. Who cares? Doesn't matter. So you've got some NPCs, they start catching feelings with each other and they want to go on a couple of first dates. Great. Break the ice. You have a couple of tables for terrible things that could happen. They can run through these. Those are your roadblocks. You're moving it forward, right? You can do the same thing with people that, the star-crossed lovers. They already have a reason why they shouldn't be together, and you give them opportunities, things that they've got to do in order to break that down. And that's all very interesting, and that tells really intricate stories. fun, engaging stories, because as the game master, throwing stuff at your players to take care of, to figure out, to overcome. That's what it's all about.
Yeah. Again, it allows you to incorporate some things that might be a little bit different from what you're probably initially thinking about. Like, well, how would I even go about incorporating this into my game?
Well, there's another thing that I think we should all think about when we're talking about it, incorporating romance into a game. And that is how to actually be romantic. Like, what does it take to be romantic?
Josh will tell you in these 13 easy steps on how to be romantic.
There's not 13. No, I actually went.
I guess there are 8. So
there's 8.
Count them.
Yes. So I was looking up like different romance things, and I came across a masterclass article called "How to Be Romantic," and was looking through it. And I'm like, these are perfect. These you can like put these sort of things into a character and sort of character interaction, and really show some of that romance. But at the same time, I mean, take these things to heart. Like, you don't have to just have them in your game. Use them in your real life. Which is also kind of the point I was having with the one-on-one games, is that, yes, you can learn a lot about how to include romance in a game, but also, if you're role-playing with your partner, you can learn about romance itself and how it fits into a story. So number 1 on their list, be thoughtful.
Be thoughtful.
Be thoughtful.
Just do things that your partner might not ask for. Just,
yeah, you know that they need something. You take care of it. You anticipate what they need.
I better write these down. Hold on.
Real simple. It's like, the fun part was I wrote the how to roleplay romance, and my first entry was be thoughtful, and I'm like, no, I should probably look something up. And I went through, and like the first one on every list was be thoughtful. I'm
there
like,
you go.
Well, I know how to be romantic then. I'm fantastic at this.
I don't need the master class. Don't need to spend any money on that master class.
And then I was like, I'm going to copy down the rest of these because I'm lazy. The second one is, you're being thoughtful. You're anticipating their needs. The second thing is expressing yourself. The number of times you see these sort of relationships that might have blossomed or whatnot because somebody just didn't say that they were actually interested, that they were actually wanting to do a thing. Express yourself. Tell the partner how you feel. Mm-hmm. Characters have to, announce that sort of thing. That's the whole, like, in like Japanese manga, where like they confess their feelings. Oh, Shinji, I love you. That sort of thing. This is absolutely something that needs to happen in a role-playing game, because if you just toy around with it and never sort of express it, it's not going to happen.
Again, that's a lot of how real life kind of goes, but did express yourself.
Duh. This is very much like real life. Speaking of, Valentine's Day, give gifts.
Give your gifts. Get your flowers, get your chocolates, get your cute little bears.
Whatever it is that your partner likes, know what they like, get them something. I think I've got stuff planned that should work out fairly well for me this year. But as far as your players, they should think about what the other characters need and get gifts, trade things, look for stuff. The next one,
Vorpal swords looking good.
But I got you a potion of healing because every time I look at you, I'm taking 2d6 damage.
And so insert cheesy pickup lines.
Yes. No, don't do that. Know your partner's love language. Okay. Love language is the sort of thing where they talk about how does a person express their affection for another person.
Express and receive affection, I believe.
So some people like doing things, some people like saying things, uh, some people act in a certain way. Knowing how how your partner expresses themselves and receives admiration and affection is very important, because this is also how the role playing is going to work, right? You you're going to follow some of these rules in how they're going to interact. This also works for, the real world. Know what your partner likes, how they express themselves, how they show affection, how they'd like to receive affection. And how do you think you'd learn these things, Aaron?
Well, you clearly listen intently.
Yeah, yeah. Tell me about that.
So you want to learn what your partner likes,
Hmm,
hates, and fears, and wants, and you do that by listening to
that sounds great.
them.
I'm glad you told me that. I will remember that always.
Good,
Yes,
good.
listen attentively. Uh, and so like that works out really well at a table, because you got to like pay attention to what each other's doing, but listening attentively. Good idea.
It's a good practice for your characters, particularly if they're
Yeah,
bad at taking notes or listening to you in general.
yeah. Maybe we should just change that to take notes, dummy. Um, you should make time for the partner. Now, in a role playing game, obviously that would be like, we've got downtime. Let's take some time during this downtime to do a thing. Go on those icebreaker dates. Uh, Maybe run a one-on-one mission off to go do a thing, because I'm dating the rogue and they like
The
fancy
rogue wants to
things.
shoot things.
Yeah, yeah. And so we're gonna go steal some stuff and shoot some guys. Um, Whatever it is, that's their love language. Murdering and stealing. Uh, but you make time for the partner.
Yeah, again, you probably think of these, you're like, oh my god, these guys are talking about actual relationships and blah blah blah. But
Yes.
if you think about it in terms of the context of the game, like you said there, like make time for the partner. Yes, you have a little extra scene or like a quick combat scene with your partner as you go off and you go do something that you were gallivanting around and doing. Like again, it doesn't need to be like, okay, now we're gonna spend 3 hours doing a major combat with my two, you know, part people who are playing a relationship here. Like you don't need to go that far. You just need to do a little something to make that scene work.
Yeah. It's all about those little bits, spending time. Um, the next one is it says show physical affection. If you're sitting physically at a table role playing, you don't have to physically touch the other player that
I would
you're
advise
romancing.
against it most likely. I would probably say theater of the mind.
Theater of the
Physical
mind.
expression.
Uh, but like it doesn't have to be intimate touch to be a touch that is intimate. It can just be hand holding. It can be rubbing somebody's shoulder or helping them up. Anything like that can be a intimate physical touch in the sense of fantasy story. Like, player gets knocked down, I'm going to run out of my way to make sure that I can help them up in the middle of this fight. Um, you know, that is sort of a physical affection that can sit within a fantasy story that can still have, romantic intentions.
Finally, Josh, you got a surprise.
I think you do. I think you got to do something for them, for your partner, that they will be happy about when they find out it happened. Now this is a lot different than how I surprise my wife, which is by doing things that I know she will be mad at when she finds out later. Don't do that. That's not romantic. Do things that they like.
So yeah, so these are all the reason why you would do all of these things within your game, um, is not to, indulge the two people who are engaging in the romance, but it is to foster their relationship in a way, or the character relationships within a way that you can then write interesting stories about the characters. So, by your characters doing these things or acting them out throughout the game, if they've gone through the minutia of acting out the romance, um, then they will be much more invested when things happen to one another within the game. Like that, you should expect that to kind of put my final thoughts on this whole thing. You should expect that if your players are okay with all this, we've gone through all like the prerequisites for this. Your players want to engage in this, and your players do all this extra role playing within your game. They're probably pretty darn invested in the immersion of the characters within the game. Like they are full kind of thespian engaged within the story and will react appropriately. I would not expect people to go through all of these hoops and then ultimately be like, something happens to the other person. It's like, okay, let's sit down and have a real strategy meeting right now. Okay, we got to think this through.
No, it's definitely going to be the heart on the sleeve, romance boy running off doing the dumb thing. Yeah, and by knowing how to romance, knowing the master class of romance, it makes a more full story to that romance. It doesn't feel like just slapdash throw things on. It feels like, like I'm gonna hit on the bar wench, and okay, roll a dice. Okay, she likes you. Great. No, like you can like, this is role playing. This is storytelling. This is getting involved in that. And if you are interested in telling that sort of story, if your players want to engage in that sort of story, once again, consent is king. Make sure everybody's okay with what you're doing. That this gives you that extra level of engagement, that it gives a fuller story, that when something happens, now you've got real stakes. You've got real relationships between players, and you can use players against each other, together. Whatever happens really matters. This makes it a much more involved story rather than just a hack and slash dungeon adventure, or, just we showed up, we solved the murder mystery, we're done. We don't need to bother with this ever again. You care about the characters.
Exactly.
Yeah. So,
anything else you want to add to this, Josh?
No, I just like hearing the sound of your voice, Aaron.
There we go. If you've enjoyed this steamy session of Level Up Your Gaming Podcast, let us know at levelupyourgamingpodcast.com. Level Up Your Gaming Podcast at gmail.com or facebook.com/Level Up Your Gaming. Also, the podcast on YouTube, so you smash the like button there. Subscribe to the podcast at your favorite podcasting site, review it, recommend it to a friend, all those good things. And that'll wrap us up for the week. So for Josh, I'm Aaron. Have a good week, everyone.
Bye.